All right, welcome to the 2020-2021 academic year student survey results overview. The results that are presented are representative of those received by May 1st, 2021. I'll be providing an additional update once the survey closes on June 1st of 2021, though the responses that we're seeing now are actually quite representative of the types of students that we have using our system. So let's dive in and take a look. When we look at the breakdown by domain, these are representative of the breakdown of the number of students that we have using the system per domain. So no real surprises here. We've got a lot of representation from PT, PA, and nursing, with smaller representation from OT and social work. We've created a section called Other to capture any domain that had less than 10 respondents. So within this Other section, you're going to see psychology, speech and language pathology, public health, nutrition, and gerontology represented. Across versions, we also see the breakdown of students pretty well aligned with the breakdown of usage that we see for the system. So about 3/4 of our students using version 3 and 1/4 using version 4. Of course, we've got these 53 students here who have somehow neglected to answer the question about which version are they using. Certainly not a question that was designed poorly. We actually included a picture of their landing page and says, does your landing page look like this or that? So there clearly wasn't any difficulty in understanding what is version 3 versus version 4, just 53 students who chose not to respond to that question. Looking at the breakdown per domain by version, again, very representative of the number of students that we see using the system for each of these domains. So the first question that we asked the students is, overall, how user-friendly do you find Exxat to be? And we gave them a 5-point Likert scale, anywhere from extremely non-user-friendly to extremely user-friendly. And what's really interesting is when we compare version 3 to version 4 in this year's survey, they're pretty equal. So we've got less than 40% of our students are satisfied, meaning they don't feel negatively and they don't feel neutral. They are truly satisfied. We've got about 40% of our students are feeling that way in both version 3 and in version 4. We'll dive into this further by domain in a moment, but looking at the overall population of respondents, this is what we see. What's interesting is when we compare this to our survey from 2 years ago, from the 2018-2019 academic year, more than half of our students were satisfied. Again, they don't feel negatively, they don't feel neutrally, they are truly satisfied. So that's quite a shift from 2 years ago to today. And there weren't any real clear trends comparing last year's data to this year's data that would really point to why that is, but certainly something to note. Of course, we don't have data from the 2019-2020 academic year. This time of year was the outbreak of the pandemic, and it really felt like a poor time to be sending client satisfaction surveys. So for the purposes of comparison, we will be using that 2018-2019 academic year as our comparison point. So as I mentioned, we're going to be diving into each individual domain and how each domain quantified the user friendliness. So let's take a look there. We talk a lot about nursing satisfaction because there are so very many nursing students and so very many nursing programs out there. And in looking at this chart, you do see that our nursing students are among the group that are dissatisfied. But equally dissatisfied are our social work students, where there are nearly 80% of them that are either neutral or dissatisfied, and students in other domains as well. So as we look towards growing our system and growing our client base, other domains are another area where there's extreme opportunity for growth. And it would be really nice to be able to focus in there along with nursing. When we look at the trends in the comments that these students made about why they find Exxat to be un-user friendly, we saw a lot of the same trends that we saw from our other domains. Difficulty in navigation, difficulty finding the things that you need to find, non-intuitive design. A couple people just called it quite confusing. So we saw very similar trends to what we saw in other domains, but we saw them amplified for our social work students, our nursing students, and our students from domains that are less represented. So same themes that we saw from PT, OT, PA, just much more amplified. You can also see here at the bottom of this slide version 3 versus version 4 for PA and for PT. And what's really interesting is that PA finds version 3 to be more user-friendly, whereas PT finds version 4 to be more user-friendly. And as we dive in to the statistics even more, it will become clear to you why that's the case. This has a lot to do with PA's very heavy reliance on patient logging and the way that patient logging and entering a patient log is handled in version 4. We have some opportunities for improvement there that I think will really help to bolster that V4 PA student satisfaction. And we'll take a look at that when we get there. We did ask our students which features did you find most useful. This probably wasn't the most useful question to ask. Many students just said, oh, none of the features are useful. This is just something that my school asks me to use. So not a whole lot of really interesting information here to look at. I actually considered removing this slide as a whole, and I thought, okay, well, let me put it up there. Perhaps you all have some ideas as to how this information could be used. So here it is for you to take a look at. But what we did do is take this same feature set, completing a timesheet, getting approval for documentation, entering a patient log, and we asked not only how useful were these features, but how easy was it to complete these types of actions? And that's what I'd like to take a look at next. So our first one is about researching clinical sites. Quite a lot of students don't do this. And I was really shocked to see, that this is a very common thing to do in PT and in OT, where we have those standard forms, right? The PTSEs and the CEFWA form in OT that allows students to research sites ahead of time. But a lot of our other domains don't really use the system to do that. So this first part of the bar, the blank part, the white part, really speaks to how many students don't even attempt this task. And then, of course, the colored parts tell us of those who attempted the task, what was their satisfaction level. And it's no surprise to me either that the domains that have these standard forms, as I mentioned, PT and OT, are much more satisfied with their experience in researching clinical sites than some of the other domains that don't have those standardized forms. And that's really where the variation here lies. We actually had a couple students say that they didn't even know that you could research clinical sites within the system. So perhaps an opportunity for education for our school users as well. Of course, creating your student profile is something that almost every student does, and we've got a lot of very robust feedback here. Overall, people find this to be a very easy task, though strangely our social work clients, again, remain largely dissatisfied as compared to other domains. And PA students seem to find the version 4 profile creation much more streamlined than PT students. Not really sure. There weren't a whole lot of comments that helped me understand why there, especially because the profile experience is the same for all domains in version 4. Wondering though if some of those fields that are provided there are a little bit unique to or specific to PA, but a very strange variation that we saw on that one. Of course, building and submitting a wish list, no question why we have this here. PA students don't submit wish lists in the same way that a PT or an OT program would. So their experience in using that in version 4 has been very limited because that type of wish list is not yet available. So lots of students not utilizing this feature either because of the way that their domain handles placements or the availability of that feature. Looking at submitting assignments, again, no real super strong trends here. Many programs do not do this, and among the ones who do, there's a very small number of students who are satisfied with this feature. Again, we see that strong trend in social work and in nursing of dissatisfaction with these kinds of features. So a nice place for us to key in. Entering a patient log really sticks out to us. So we know that PA, one of their flagship features is patient log, and that's reiterated here by the fact that that white bar representing the students who said they don't use this feature is very, very small in PA and very large everywhere else. But what we see is that satisfaction is not that great in terms of version 3. we have about 40% of our students are feeling satisfied with patient log, whereas in version 4, we have only about 30% of our students are feeling satisfied with patient log. We've actually taken the patient log comments and broken them down further, and we'll be taking a look at where that satisfaction drives from in a few slides here. Timesheet-wise, again, not a whole lot of surprises here. The domain that relies most heavily on timesheets is, of course, nursing. And we see that, by and large, this is one of the features that they tend to feel a little bit more positively about. We've got about 40% of our nursing students are satisfied with this feature, which is really nice to see. Uploading and getting approval for required documents and compliance documents was another area that we got a lot of feedback from. And while the students may have felt that this was a negative area, I'd like to take a moment to give kudos to the approved team, because so many students said, it's a lot of back and forth and everything has to be exactly right. And, it shouldn't be this hard. I gave you the document. And so I actually really want to give a shout out to the approved team for being incredibly thorough and doing their jobs well. Unfortunately, that results in the students feeling a bit dissatisfied with it. But overall, we can see a pretty strong trend across all domains, hovering right around that 40% of students feeling, 40% of students or better, feeling satisfied with the ability to upload a document and gain approval. It was really just students who were dissatisfied with the back and forth, which I see as a positive thing, making sure that the students have the correct documents on file. So this was a crazy trend to me. We asked students, have you reached out to support? And we saw 2 years ago that about 20% of them had. And looking at this year's version 3 numbers, they weren't, significantly different. About 26% had. But when we look at version 4, more than half of our students using version 4 are reaching out to support. So lots and lots of help needed from the support team in version 4. And I think that just really speaks to the fact that this product continues to be, in development. We have a lot of iteration going on and a lot of improvements going on, but that also means that students have different experiences each time that they log in. And actually, a lot of these support tickets were related to login issues. We'll take a look at that in a minute. But most of this has to do with being locked out, or stale SSO requests, or having completed a form and submitted it only to find out that you've been locked out of the system and you've lost your work. Overall, the student satisfaction with their contact with the support team is actually pretty consistent version to version. Our support team seems to be doing a really lovely job. Version 4, we've got about 60% of 60% satisfaction in terms of the speed, the clarity, and the responsiveness. And in version 3, we're holding steady between the 2 years, right around that 40% rate. So doing reasonably well there. And when we include the average responses or the neutral responses, we really find that it's a very small number of students who are dissatisfied, who find the support team's responses unacceptable or poor. So in this particular instance, I think it actually is fine to count average as a satisfied student, whereas previously we had said, okay, well, neutral doesn't qualify as satisfied. Here, I think it does. I think anyone who's interacted with any support agent for any type of software would find average to be a perfectly acceptable place to be. So kudos to our support team for their speed of resolution, their clarity of communication, and their responsiveness across both versions. So we asked an open-ended question: what can Exxat do to increase usability? And we saw lots and lots and lots of topics come up. But we did see 4 very strong trends. We saw feedback on the intuitive nature of our design and the number of clicks required to complete any given task. We heard that loud and clear, and this is not a new topic. We've actually heard this many, 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 many times before. And, one of our guiding principles in the early days of version 4 was that nothing should be more than 3 clicks away. We've certainly, gotten away from that, but I think it would be nice to kind of hone in on that again and really focus in on, okay, how can we make features quicker to access, easier to find, or bring forward those more commonly used features? The other trend that we saw was associated to patient logging. So big chunk on patient logging in general, but another really big chunk specifically looking at CPT codes and ICD-10 codes. So I want to take these four big common areas and really zoom in more on them. So taking a look at the intuitive nature of our design, people really often feel quite confused. The instructions and the naming conventions are confusing for them. Very often we use many different phrases to mean the same thing. And we're using full sentences where a single word could suffice. And a number of students who I infer must have experience in UX design actually called out and said, you really designed it for the developer. I understand how this makes sense, but it doesn't follow my experience as a user. A few students said, if you sat back and you watched me use the system, you'd realize how all over the place I am. So lots of just general statements about that, people having difficulty finding what they need and difficulty navigating. Overall, people would love to see us make this more user-friendly. And of course, that's feedback that we can get to with usability testing. People also felt pretty strongly that there were too many clicks to get to where you're going, and also lots of redundant ways to do the same thing, many different ways to get to the same place, which people found frustrating. There are a lot of specific options that don't apply that are still appearing for many people, and they feel that that's cluttering up their screen. For example, a nursing specific feature that might be showing for a PA student or vice versa. Students also find that the sections that they access most frequently are very click heavy to get to. And this is where we start edging into that feedback about patient logging. So students have to, enter in a patient log for every patient they treat during a day, which could be anywhere from 10 to 20 to 30 patients per day. And each time they go to enter in a patient log, it takes them a very large number of clicks to get there. And students continue to feel that these frequently used features should be pulled to the forefront instead of continually landing on that the home screen, which requires them to click in. So overall, lots of requests to streamline the system and to simplify the ability to access these more frequently used pieces of the system. So looking specifically at patient logging, we saw some very specific trends. One is that came out really loud and clear is the search feature for both CPT codes and ICD-10 codes. People were really, really frustrated by this search feature in that it's slow to return results, that you have to search for a specific exact term, that you have to, that exact uses a lot of abbreviations. Students would like to see things spelled out. Decimals are a very common thing used in CPT codes that are not included here. So our naming conventions and our labeling conventions are not in check with the standard or with the usual, and students find that to be frustrating. A few suggestions that came out pretty loudly as well that seem to be quite good ones is that frequently used ICD-10 codes and CPT codes should rise to the top. If a student is doing a rotation in orthopedics, they're going to continually use orthopedic codes. And so for the system to be able to recognize that and pull those to the top of the list so they wouldn't have to search anew, that would be a useful feature. Students also want the ability to search for a particular CPT code. For example, I as a provider very often use ICD-10 code 781.2, which is abnormal gait. As a physical therapist, I use that very often, and I would love to be able to go into the system and just type in 781.2, hit enter, and there it is. These are codes that care providers often know or learn very quickly. So having to search by the name and not being able to search by the code itself is another rate limiting factor for inputting these codes. People also want the ability to create templates. Very often as a care provider, you're following up with the same patients each and every day in a hospital setting. You've got your roster of 30 patients who are admitted, and you're checking in with each one every day. To be able to create that template and drag and drop it over would be a very useful thing and something that people really are craving. Being able to carry forward the data that's entered into a patient log over to a procedure log to avoid that duplicative entry. So, two very interesting common suggestions that I thought were worth calling out here. And I do also want to say that these comments on CPT codes and patient logging are domain agnostic. We're hearing these in both version 3 and in version 4. So opportunities in both versions. Looking at the version specifics, though, I do want to call out a few things for version 4 individually that we didn't hear about version 3. And I alluded to both of these earlier. 10% of our version 4 students called out frustration over their logins. Many of them feel that they're automatically logged out too quickly, and more than that, they're not given any warning. So very often they'll step away for a few moments, come back and finish the form that they were working on, and then they hit submit only to find that they've been logged out of the system and all of their work has been lost. So being logged out after a short period of time or without warning, leading to lost work is a very strongly heard frustration. Many of our students who log in using SSO continue to face stale requests. A lot of them called out that it takes multiple attempts and cache clears, 7 to 10 attempts per login to be able to access the system successfully, and lots of frustration surrounding that. Even more than login issues, we just heard about glitches, lots of glitches, and that was a phrase that students used again and again. A few very frustrated students said, please just make the system work. So our students are really feeling our continued iterative process here. And as we continue to iterate and continue to improve, I'm hopeful that we'll see these numbers increase in terms of satisfaction as well. So that's all I have for the quick overview. This is kind of the midterm checkpoint on our student satisfaction survey. Again, it closes for us on June 1st, so hopefully about a month from now I'll be able to provide a full update and our final data, but strong trends emerging and some actionable items for us here even at the midterm point. So back with you guys again in June to go over the rest of the details. I hope this was helpful, and please let me know if you'd like to see the raw data. I certainly have it available and would be happy to share it with you. All right, thanks very much.